And to talk about the political road ahead, I'm joined now by Senator Robert Menendez, who's of New Jersey, who's the head of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, and from Greenville, South Carolina, Republican Senator Jim DeMint, one of the conservative leaders in the Senate. And Senator Menendez, let me begin with you, and let's start with Massachusetts. Your job is to get Democrats elected, and I guess that didn't go so well last week. Are you willing to accept, especially in light of the reports from Massachusetts, that there was unhappiness with how nimble the Democrats were, that there wasn't enough support gotten quickly enough to the Coakley campaign? Do you think you bear some of the responsibility for what went down up there?
Well, look, there are lessons to be learned from Massachusetts, and we certainly did everything that we could in resources, in personnel, to help Martha Coakley win that election. I think the biggest takeaway from Massachusetts, however, is that there is enormous economic angst in the country. There are people who have lost their jobs. They have a family member who's lost their jobs. Their house is worth less than what their mortgage is. And that was, I believe, a driving force of the voters in that state, and it exists across the country. And that's why I believe that the President in the State of the Union speech will address those concerns head on, and Democrats in the Congress, hopefully joined by Republicans as well, will address it as we move legislatively to help small businesses have the resources they need to continue to exist and to grow and to hire people, to be able to create opportunities and infrastructure work across the country, to help states and localities be able to retain critical personnel that is necessary and keep those people employed but deliver services. So I think that these are the elements of what you'll see in a very focused jobs package, on an economic package, and also making sure that middle-class families have tax relief as well. Those are all the elements of what we'll go to work on, and a lot of what I clearly heard from Massachusetts.
The Massachusetts message heard loud and clear. And Senator DeMint, I want to ask you about something you said last summer about the health care reform fight as it was beginning. Listen to this.
If we're able to stop Obama on this, it will be his Waterloo. It will break him.
So, did you break him? And is that really how Americans want you to behave here in Washington? Break the president?
Terry, good morning, and Bob, good morning to you.
Good morning,
I did not want this to be the president's Waterloo, but pushing through a massive government takeover of our healthcare system was certainly not a good idea. And what happened in Massachusetts is just part of an American awakening. We saw it in Virginia, in New Jersey. We see it all over the country in tea parties, in town halls. People are alarmed and angry about the spending, the debt, the government takeovers. And I've been amazed to hear Mr. Axelrod and what the president said this week. After 3 years of controlling both houses of Congress, they're still trying to blame someone else. Massachusetts was a rejection of the president's massive policies of spending and debt. And if we're going to work together, we've got to do it in a step-by-step, reasonable approach. We've been, as Republicans, pushing health care reform for years. Unfortunately, the president, when he was in the Senate, he voted against interstate competition. He voted against fair tax treatment for people who don't get their health insurance at work. He voted against changing the abusive lawsuit system that adds so much to the cost. So it's hard for us to take seriously that the president really wants health care reform. He seems to want more of a Franklin Roosevelt massive government program. I think the American people want us to work together to just step by step improve the best system in the world.
Well, there's no question. You both agree on the amount of anger that's in the electorate. But, you know, Senator DeMint, the polls show that while the voters in Massachusetts did reject the Democratic approach, they have not embraced what the Republicans are talking about. They can't really figure it out much. There was one liberal wag who said Obama campaigned on hope, Scott Brown campaigned on nope. There are a lot of people out there who see the Republican Party as the party of no right now.
Well, clearly on health care reform, if you look at the record, we have been pushing reform for years. But the rejection of the Democrat agenda in Massachusetts was not necessarily acceptance of Republicans. We've got to earn the right, we've got to re-earn the trust of the American people. So it's incumbent on us over the next several months to show the American people how we can not only improve health care, but focus on the real priority of jobs. The president's stimulus has been a massive failure. When the Democrats came into power 3 years ago, unemployment was half what it is today. We've seen in the past, from John Kennedy all the way to the present, that broad-based tax cuts for small businesses as well as individuals is the best way to get the economy churning again. This massive government spending program is not working, and we've got to recognize that quickly. Otherwise, people are going to continue to lose their jobs.
Well, Terry, you know, my dear friend Jim DeMint did want to break Barack Obama. And the Republican whole political strategy is for this president and this Congress to fail. The sad thing about that, it's not about Barack Obama failing or Democrats in Congress failing. It's about the country failing at one of the most critical challenges the country has had. And, you know, I love my dear friend talking about, fiscal responsibility, but when George Bush came to office, he had a $236 billion surplus. Barack Obama was handed a $1.3 trillion deficit. He was handed an economy that was almost on the verge of depression. He was handed financial institutions that went wild during the 8 years that Republicans controlled and ultimately were on the verge of collapse and would have created a major calamity for people across this country. So the bottom line is, and since the president came, after having inherited all of those realities and trying to meet those challenges head on and having to spend so that we could stop the economy from going into depression, be able to start moving the economy in the right direction, meet the challenges of the abyss that we were almost in, all our Republican colleagues have said is no. They have used the filibuster, a procedure in the Senate, to stop progress 101 times, unprecedented in the history of the United States Senate. So I hope that they understand that they have as much responsibility to help us govern and move forward. No doesn't create a job. No doesn't create health care insurance for anyone, or for that fact, stop the abuses of the insurance company. No doesn't help a senior citizen with their prescription drug coverage. It's time to begin to say yes to move the country forward.
Okay, let me just follow up. You gave a very eloquent description of the situation when Barack Obama became president and the anxiety in the country. But what did he choose to do? Spent 8 months on health care, which people ended up not understanding and certainly not approving.
Well, no.
Was that a mistake? Wait, let me just ask, yes or no, was it a mistake for the president?
First of all, let's look at what happened last year. People forget. It's amazing how quickly, just as people forget what Barack Obama inherited and the enormous economic consequences and spending on the Republicans, 2 wars totally unpaid for, credit card mentality, putting it on our kids' future, a Medicare Part D program totally unpaid for, tax cuts for the wealthiest totally unpaid for. But, you know, at the bottom line is he passed a stimulus package to stop the nation from going into a deep depression. He succeeded at that. An omnibus bill to create new high-energy jobs that we are moving towards.
So health care was the right thing to do in your judgment?
No, and health care is an economic issue as well. If you're a family without health insurance and you get sick, you can be in bankruptcy. If you're a family with health insurance and you see the skyrocketing costs that Republicans have permitted over their years of double-digit premium increases, you can't afford it. And if you're a senior who's trying to be able to deal with your prescription drug coverage and have that gap that they created, then you need to fill it. So this is what we're trying to meet.
Okay, Senator DeMint, that was quite an indictment. I got to tell you, I don't hear much bipartisanship here, but fire away.
Well, we're not going to have bipartisanship as long as the Democrats are moving towards just more spending and debt. Listen, when the president came into office, the Democrats had controlled Congress for 2 years. Presidents don't write policy and spend money. The Congress does. The Democrat Congress had taken us in the wrong direction. In the first year of the Obama's presidency, he created more debt than George Bush did in 8 years. So we've got to get rid of this inheritance idea. The president and the Democrats need to take some responsibility. The Republicans want to work with the Democrats on improving health care, focusing on jobs. There are a number of other priorities. But for this first year, the president really believed that he could steamroll the Republicans, not even have us in the same room. And in the process, he was steamrolling the American people, not listening to what they were saying. That's where the anger comes from. People feel like the president, the Democrats, and even some Republicans have not been listening to them. People are sick of politics. They're sick of both parties in a lot of ways. I've been proud that the Republicans have been coming together to try to stop the spending in debt, and now what we need to do is work together, and hopefully the president will stop this effort to take over our health care system, refocus on jobs, and look at ways to get the economy going rather than just expand the government.
All right, you're all in the same room now, not literally, but in the Senate with the 41 Republican votes. But let me shift gears. I want to ask you about this landmark Supreme Court decision that came down this week. The Supreme Court this week saying that the campaign finance reform ban on corporations and unions spending their general funds to advertise directly in favor or against individual candidates, that's a violation of free speech. That's going to help Republicans, don't you? What do you think?
Well, the big losers are the average American citizen. This is going to put enormous amount of money and influence on behalf of big oil, health insurance companies, big banks that are going to obviously support candidates who support their point of views. That means, will Republicans join us on regulatory reform so we don't have the excesses of Wall Street that they permitted? Are they going to join us to make sure that health insurance companies don't arbitrarily and capriciously deny people their health insurance that they have, even when they need it the most? So this is a David and Goliath situation. And the reality is that the average citizen is going to get steamrolled, and that's why we're going to seek to legislatively respond to it.
You're going to try and reform this through legislation.
We are going to try to make sure...
It's a First Amendment decision. It's going to be hard to do.
Well, it's a First Amendment decision, but there are a lot of elements on disclosure and otherwise that can, I think, curtail this. And I hope that the Republicans, this was a reform effort 20 years ago when it was instituted. John McCain, Feingold, a big part of this. I hope that Republicans are going to join us hand in hand to make sure that the special interests don't roll over the little guy.
All right, Senator DeMint, quickly, are you on board for trying to limit the impact of this Supreme Court decision?
We can't promote freedom and democracy by repressing free speech. That's not the way to do it. I think people should be able to come together in associations and organizations and spend money to get their message out. I think that's going to promote the Democrat process instead of really what we've got now is we essentially give the labor unions carte blanche over our system, grassroots as well as spending. I think this will give businesses a chance to participate in the process as well as associations. So I think free speech needs to come first.
Okay, and finally, are you in favor of foreign corporations being able to participate in American elections through this decision?
I don't believe that right now foreigners cannot give to the political process, and I hope as this thing is sorted out that we'll make sure that this is an American focus. So we'll have to sort all that out. I hadn't read all the details of the court decision.
A corporation is a corporation, and a foreign corporation is going to be able to spend their monies in determining who is elected to the United States Congress. That's not good for the average citizen.
It is a tough problem going ahead. Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey, Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Well,